Welcome, everybody. And this is a talk about resilience, about how we can meet difficult experiences and difficult life circumstances with resilience, how we can grow our resilience and foster more resilience within ourselves so that we can fight on when life gets tough. So just a little bit of background in case, people don't know who I am. My name's Deborah and I'm a naturopathic nutrition and health coach, and I'm qualified as a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist and a mindfulness teacher and also an eye movement trauma therapist. And I work particularly supporting people who live with chronic illness. And I do that using my own lived experience because I have MCAS and Lyme disease and dysautonomia like many of you here will have. So I've started tonight's talk with a little bit of a personal experience, really. This is my personal story to share with you, because I think sometimes when people say, oh, you should, just think positively or be more resilient, it's easy to think, well, have you really ever experienced difficulty? It's all very well to be resilient when you haven't really experienced a lot of difficulty. So I wanted to share a little bit about my life story and what I've been through, so that you can understand that I've used these tools to help myself on my own journey. And this is how I've helped myself to be resilient through life's difficulty. And I want to say to begin with, that I don't think that my story is in any way particularly special or unique, or that I've had any kind of, that I'm unique in experiencing these difficulties, because I know that, each and every person here will have experienced difficulty, and that you are all, having difficulty with MCAS and with lots of other things as well. Everybody has difficulty. So I wanted to just share a little bit of my own story so that you can see how we can use these resilience tools in practice. So I was 2 years old when I first began to complain that I was in pain, and I grew up in pain. I was constantly in pain and nobody could find anything wrong. And this is me at 21, and I was still in pain, and still nobody could tell me why I was in pain. But I was experiencing excruciating pain throughout my childhood. And it wasn't until my mid-20s when I finally found a doctor who realized that I'd got an abnormally formed pelvis and I'd got a nerve trapped in my pelvis. And I ended up having 2 surgeries. And by then I obviously had nerve damage, but I recovered a lot. I was hugely grateful for those surgeries, and the pain improved, but it didn't go away. And I still had a lot of pain in my back, which was also happening from my teenage years. And in my 30s, the back pain became really excruciating, to the point where I really couldn't stand up. And I was walking with a stick, and I was off work for weeks and weeks on end. And I was diagnosed, or I should say misdiagnosed, with mild arthritis and told to just keep going. And I was really struggling to be able to keep going. And you can see there, that's me with my mum, with my walking stick, and I could hardly walk. And actually, in my mid-30s, it was discovered that I'd had two spinal discs that had ruptured almost all the way across my spinal cord, and I was actually losing the use of my leg at that point. And I had to have two spinal operations and a metal plate put in. And also around that time, I had multiple deep vein thrombosis in my legs as well, and so months of daily warfarin treatment. So that was another challenging period of time in my life, which I came through. And in my 20s and 30s, whilst all of that was going on, I got a degree in ancient medieval history. I started working in museums. I got a postgraduate diploma in museum studies, and I was working for Lincolnshire County Council Heritage Service for around 18 years. And there's some pictures of me there at work in the museum service. And I was doing that whilst battling with the pain and through surgeries. And also in my 30s, my lovely dad, who supported me through all of that, and he was driving me to medical appointments all over the country to see specialists everywhere to try and get the help I needed, whilst at the same time he was also battling against inoperable cancer. And unfortunately, he passed away in December 2015 when he was just 71 and I was 38. And my nan passed away the year before, my granddad passed away the year after, and I only had four close family members. So I lost three of those four family members in the space of 2 years. So that was another difficult period of time in my life. And then aged 40, I was made redundant from the museum service. And I qualified, I went to evening school and I qualified to teach in adult education. And I applied for lots of different jobs. And I was very lucky to get a job working for the Woodland Trust, delivering engagement and events in woods all over the country. And I really loved that job. But unfortunately, I was medically dismissed from that role because of my back problems and the fact that the travelling became really difficult with my back. But the lovely people at the Woodland Trust persuaded me to stay on and apply for a different job, which I did and which I got. And that was the job of my dreams, really. It was delivering a project in partnership with the National Trust, and it would have been, the job of my dreams. But on the very first day of the job of my dreams, I was in absolute agony with excruciating pain in my chest. And over the coming weeks, I was battling to keep working and learn this new job. And the pain just got worse and worse and worse. And I was taken to hospital 3 times in an ambulance because they thought, I had some kind of heart problem. And eventually I had a scan that showed inflammation around my heart, and I was misdiagnosed with pleurisy at that point. And I kept hoping that it would get better, but it didn't. It just got worse and worse and worse. And over the next few weeks, which went into months, I developed all of these whole body systemic symptoms, which I'm sure most of you will recognize as the symptoms of MCAS and of having way too much histamine in my whole body, in every system of my body. And I completely lost the ability to sleep, and I was having seizures and neurological symptoms and muscle spasms. The brain fog became completely intolerable. I couldn't function at all. I had whole body symptoms in every system of my body. And like many of you, I experienced a lot of medical dismissal and misunderstanding, and I had to really fight and battle to get any help with that. And it was 8 months before I finally worked out that I had MCAS. Like most of you, I'd never heard of MCAS at that point, but I learned and I found that I had MCAS. And then 2 years later, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and it became apparent that I'd caught Lyme disease, and that had triggered the MCAS for me. And so for most of my 40s, I've spent battling the symptoms of both MCAS and Lyme disease on a daily basis, which, as many of you will know, it's not a lot of fun, and that's difficult to get through. During that time, however, I have resurrected my membership of the National Council of Integrative Psychotherapists. I've refreshed my hypnotherapy. I've qualified to teach mindfulness. I've qualified as a naturopathic health coach, and I've qualified as an eye movement therapist. So even in that time of difficulty, when I became able to function and became better than I was, I continued to study and to learn, and I'm now running my own health coaching business and also working for Mast Action, as many of you know. So that's just a little bit of background on my story and the difficulties that I faced on my life journey. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about different resilience tools, different strategies that we can use to help us when we're facing difficulty. And this is a list of the different tools that I'm going to cover. I won't read them all out because it will take up lots of time, but I will cover each of these in turn and explain different strategies that we can use that can help us. So the first one I'm going to talk about is something that I learned from my dad, and that is a sense of humor will get you through anything. And he kept the nurses in the hospice in fits of laughter right up until the day that he died, because he was always laughing. And it taught me that laughter will get you through anything. And this lovely quote from Maya Angelou: laugh as much as possible, always laugh. It's the sweetest thing one can do for oneself and one's fellow human beings. And actually, research now shows that laughing does build resilience, and it does help us to cope with difficult things. So my number one tip that I would suggest is that no matter how bad things get, keep your sense of humor, because it really does help with building that resilience and helping you to cope. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this idea of core needs. So there are many schools of therapy that recognize that we have certain essential physical, emotional, and physiological requirements for our well-being. As human beings, we have a common set of core needs that we all need to meet. And the human givens model of therapy particularly focus on these. They call them human givens, things that humans need in order to function. And this is the human givens list. You'll see others, but this one, they're all very much the same because they are, you know, a standard set of needs. So we need to feel safe. We need security. We need to be able to receive attention and give attention. We need a sense of autonomy and control over our own lives. We need a sense of emotional intimacy to feel connected to at least one other being who accepts us totally for who we are. We need to feel part of a community. We need opportunities for privacy, so some time alone to be able to process and reflect on what's happened to us. We need a sense of status within society. We need to feel competent and that we have achieved things. And we need a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives, from being stretched and challenged to grow and develop. And those are, as I say, there'll be different words for them, but those concepts are our core needs. And every single one of us needs to be fulfilling in some way, even in a small way, each of those needs. So thinking about those needs, reflect on that list and evaluate, are these needs being met for you? Are your basic needs satisfied? Because when one or more of our core needs is unmet, our stress levels increase and our resilience drops. It's really, really crucial to our resilience that we have all of those needs being met. And if there are gaps, if you have a need or more than one need that is not being met, then think about how can you meet that need, either through asking for help or changing how you help yourself and what you're doing for yourself, or changing your environment. And you know, this is where we sometimes need to get creative when we live with illness, because some of our needs, you know, we struggle to get them met in the conventional ways that society, you know, suggests that we meet them, by having a job, for example, or by having a relationship. Those things can sometimes be challenging for us. And so, you know, we can meet those needs in different ways. So, for example, the emotional intimacy doesn't need to be a romantic partner. It can be a friend. It can even be a pet. You know, we can just cultivate that sense of being connected through any relationship. And for example, status, you know, we don't need to have a job to cultivate a sense of status. We can do volunteering, for example, or we can support people in other ways in order to give us a sense of being fulfilled and having meaning and purpose in our lives. So thinking about your core needs and making sure that you have something in each of those boxes really helps to build your resilience and give you a strong foundation from which you can then meet the challenges that life throws at you. And following on from core needs, there is also the idea of resources. So thinking about challenges that you've overcome in the past, times in your life when you've experienced difficulty, thinking about what resources you used to help you, because we all have resources available to us, and they might be internal resources. So it might be our own skills that we have, it might be our personality, like our sense of humor, or the fact that we think positively, or that we're a kind person, or that we have some kind of knowledge or training that we know about things. We have internal resources. They might be practical skills, like you're good at DIY, or you're good at sport, or you're good at writing, or you can research things. We have practical abilities that can help us, and those are resources that we can draw on. They might be external resources. So you might have family members, friends, contacts, connections, people in your network that can support you and that you can reach out to help you. And places as well, places that you have available to you, places that bring you a sense of stability, or that make you happy, or places you can go. It might involve material possessions, so things that you have that you can use, or support from any source. Thinking about, external sources of information, the internet, your ability to look things up on Google, going to GPs, going to Citizens Advice Bureau, thinking about all of the resources that you have available to you with any given issue, and how can you use those to help you now. So your success rate at surviving the difficult experiences that you've been through in life is currently 100%, because we're all here. So you have the ability to survive difficult things. We all have. And that is largely down to the resources that we have available to us. Thinking about what's enabled you to survive those things. What are those resources that helped you? And how can you mobilize those resources to help you now with the current challenge that you face? Which of your skills, your attributes, and your resources can you use now? How can you make things better? And you can use those resources, even in small ways, to leverage a little bit of improvement in your circumstances. So whenever you find yourself in a difficult situation, looking at your resources and thinking about what you can bring to the table to help you with that situation helps you to get through that and fosters resilience. And similarly, your support network is a crucial part of that. We're wired as human beings to be connected. We're designed to be a tribe species. And so we've adapted to live with other people, to connect with other people. And our vagus nerve that controls, whether we're in fight or flight or rest and digest, that the optimal state for our vagus nerve, the ventral vagal state, is one of safety and connection. So when we feel safe and when we feel connected with others, that is our optimal state of existence. And so making sure that you have a connection around you with others is crucial to your ability to be resilient. And so we get an enormous amount from our network of people. We get emotional support, we get practical help, we just get that sense of belonging. That's a core need for us that's being met. So cultivating relationships, connecting with your peers, asking for help, reaching out, asking for support, and reciprocating. When you give support, you get support. And so it's a reciprocal relationship. And the more we can build those relationships with people around us, the better things are. And when we become poorly, we tend to withdraw, and we tend to pull in, and we tend to become isolated for lots of different reasons. And it's important to become aware of that and to notice that that's happening, and to deliberately and consciously make an effort to reach out. And to, if you find that your support network has dwindled, then deliberately search out a new support network, find other ways to connect with people, through Mast Action, with, the peer support that they do, or through others. Any way that you can get a support network is going to help you. A self-care toolkit is really essential, and this is different for everybody. There's no one size fits all. Some people it's going for a walk in nature, other people it's meditation, other people it's doing their art or some kind of creative thing. Each of us has things that nourish us and make us feel good. And when we become poorly, we often, again, we kind of let those things go by the wayside. We forget to do them, or we find that we can't for some reason. And then it's really important to find alternatives and to bring in that self-care and to make that list and to have it in your mind, have it written down somewhere, because it's no good waiting for the moment that you need it. We become resilient through having those things in place regularly, all the time, because it's giving us that stability, it's filling us up, it's nourishing us, it's nurturing us, and that makes us more resilient. So if you find that you haven't got anything in your life that brings you joy, that brings you pleasure, that, you know, fills you up and makes you feel happy, then, you know, we need to be finding some things, and also things that relax you, things that calm you, things that bring you down and help you to feel calm and relaxed. So mindfulness, meditation, walking in nature, listening to music, doing hobbies, journaling, you know, socializing with friends, even with pets, you know, spending time with your pets. Those are just a very small number of suggestions, you know, gardening, doing, you know, any hobby that brings you joy and pleasure, anything that gives you time to relax and refresh. That is essential, and it needs to be in place all the time, so that when difficulty comes, you're already resourced there and you've already got strategies in place that will see you through that difficulty, rather than waiting until, you know, you're in a difficult spot and then trying to remember or find something to do or think of something to do. That's much harder. So as soon as you can, putting these things in place, having your personal toolkit that you know works for you, is really essential to helping us through difficult times. And this idea of reset. So if I were to hold a glass of water out like this with my arm outstretched for 30 seconds, I could do that quite easily. If I were to be made to hold it for an hour, I'd probably be, you know, a bit uncomfortable by the end of that hour. If someone forced me to stand with my arm out holding this glass of water for 24 hours, a whole day, I would be in severe pain and distress. If I was forced to carry it for a whole week, I would be very, very ill indeed, and, you know, in agony by that point, and really, really struggling. So it's not what you're carrying, it's not what you're holding, it's how long you're holding it for that is the problem. And so every so often we need to do things that enable us to put down the stress just for a little while. And all of those self-care tools that we were just talking about in the previous slide, that's what they do. When you're doing something that brings you joy, when you're doing something that brings you relaxation and calm, you've just put that glass of water down for a moment and you've let your arm rest. It's the same with carrying heavy bags of shopping. You have to put them down every so often, and then once you've given your arms a rest, you can pick them back up again. And once we've given ourselves a little break from the stress that we're experiencing, and had a break from that, we can then pick up the stress again. And that is what enables us to build resilience. It's holding the stress and holding the stress and holding the stress and holding the stress. That's when we start to feel like we're, you know, at breaking point. So we need moments in the day, even if it's just a few moments, we need to put that stress down and then pick it up again. And that is a way to help us to build resilience. And we can learn to become aware of our nervous system and the level of stress that we're under. And quite often we don't notice that we're holding stress until we get to breaking point. We need to learn to check in with ourselves regularly and think, how am I? Am I stressed? And notice that before it gets to breaking point, so that we can put it down sooner. We can put it down earlier before it gets to that breaking point. So we can, this is why we do those self-care things regularly, even not when we feel we really need them, even when we don't need them, we still do them regularly, because we're taking that level down. We're putting the glass down regularly, which gives us a rest and a break. And then the stress levels never build up to the point where they overflow. So regular breaks, this idea of filling your cup, because you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. So you have to fill your cup. And these nourishing activities are things that we need to program into our lives regularly, so that you can keep going and keep doing what you're doing. A very important point when we're looking at resilience is how we allow our emotions and how we view our emotions and how we work with our emotions. and accepting our emotions. So it's normal to feel the complete spectrum of human emotions, all the way from joy and happiness right down to misery and, stress and anxiety and depression, and all of the spectrum of emotions that exist in between those two extremes. And there is no right or wrong. There are no bad emotions. There are just emotions, which are normal and natural parts of being human. It's part of the human experience that we experience emotions, and we experience those emotions because we're human. All of us do. And the difficulty comes with emotions when we don't allow ourselves to recognize them and to express them, and we push them away. We have this kind of societal thing where, we don't talk about our emotions, or, we don't allow ourselves to feel the difficult ones. We feel we shouldn't feel that way. There's some guilt or shame about certain negative emotions that are perceived to be negative. So we don't admit to those and we push them away. We maybe don't even admit to ourselves that we feel like that. And we try and push on, and maybe we try and pretend that we're only ever, cheerful and happy. And that's when the difficulty happens with emotions, because when we don't express them, when we don't feel the emotions, then they build up inside of us and they become much more difficult to cope with, and we struggle to be resilient. So we can work with our emotions by allowing them, by recognizing them, and by creating some space to feel your emotions without judgment. And one of the ways that we can do that, the first step of that really, is to name the emotion that you're feeling, to label it. Because research shows that people who struggle to recognize the emotions that they're feeling and they can't name them very well, they struggle more with their mental health. And there's a kind of a name for that, alexithymia, where some people just really struggle to identify their emotions and to know what they feel. And that's linked to negative health, mental health outcomes. And people who struggle with being resilient struggle quite often with, they know they feel something, they know they feel bad, but they can't actually put a name to it. And this is where the feelings wheel comes in. And you probably can't see that terribly well at the moment because of the size of my screen. But you can go to feelingswheel.com and it's free to download the feelings wheel. And this is something that we can learn. It's a skill that we can develop and practice. And when we can give our emotions a name and we know really specifically what we're feeling, the research shows that it reduces the intensity of that emotion. It creates a little bit of space between us and the emotion. We can look at it with a little bit more distance and objectivity because we can just observe that. I'm feeling angry rather than I am anger, and anger is, it's consuming you. You can think, I feel angry. But we can only do that if we can actually identify that it is anger that we're feeling. So this is where we can use the feelings wheel. So for example, you might identify in the middle there that there's some kind of difficult feeling and you think it's sadness. So then you can look a bit deeper and think, is it loneliness? Is it vulnerability? Do I feel despair? Do I feel guilt? Do I feel depressed? Am I hurt? Is it shame? Is it embarrassment? Am I remorseful? All of these different words that express a different nuance to the feeling of being sad in some way or feeling bad in some way. If we can look at that wheel and we can narrow down the emotion that we're feeling to a word that we can then use as a label for that feeling, it helps us to become more resilient, because recognizing our emotions is the first step to being able to work with them and to cope with them. And we can recognize that they're just temporary. There's no right or wrong. We feel angry in this moment. It won't last forever. We won't feel anger forever. It's an emotion that is a normal human emotion that's just passing through us in this moment. And we can label it and recognize it as that. So one of the biggest components of resilience is self-compassion. How resilient you are is directly correlated to how kind you are to yourself. So the ability to cultivate self-kindness is crucial. And I learned this the hard way, because we're not often born with an endless amount of self-compassion for ourselves. We tend to be extremely hard on ourselves, particularly when we live with pain and illness. And we can, if we're not careful, we can become our own worst enemy. We can become critical of ourselves. We can become unkind to ourselves. We talk to ourselves in very critical and negative ways, and that wears our resilience down. We actually become much less resilient when we're constantly criticizing ourselves. And so developing the ability to treat yourself with the same kindness and care and respect and understanding that everybody else deserves, even with difficulty, even with illness, is crucial to maintaining a strong inner resilience. So we need to begin to practice talking to ourselves in ways that are kind and supportive. So thinking about what you would say to someone else, what you would say to a friend, how would you support them, how would you nurture them, and then give that support and that nurturing and those kind words to yourself, turn them inwards. Because when we are self-compassionate towards ourselves, we reduce that self-blame and we increase our emotional resilience and our inner strength. So how to practice self-compassion? First of all, acknowledging the difficulty that you're experiencing, acknowledging that you are experiencing something that's hard. You can say to yourself, this is really difficult. This is really hard. I'm feeling right now. And this is where that feelings wheel comes in. This is where the ability to identify what you're feeling really comes in handy, because you can say to yourself, I'm feeling really guilty right now. And you can own that and you can acknowledge it. That's the first step. And then feeling a sense of connection with other people, because you can recognize then that everybody feels guilty, because we're human. All human beings experience guilt. It's a normal human emotion. You're not being singled out for punishment. You don't deserve what's happening to you in any way. It's not that it's your fault. It's that it's a human experience. To suffer is human. We all experience that. And then we offer ourselves kindness. So we replace that inner criticism and that inner attacking of ourselves with a kind inner dialogue, saying, positive things to ourselves. It's okay. I'm going to be all right. I can do this. I'm going to get through this. It's not my fault. Saying positive things that you would want other people to say to you, or that you would want to say to other people. And studies show that people who forgive themselves, for example, when they make mistakes, are less likely to make that mistake again. So when we cultivate this attitude of compassion towards ourselves, we actually improve our ability to be resilient and to deal with difficult things and to get through life, more easily, without making mistakes or without, having problems so much. So this idea of nourishing yourself and not punishing yourself is really key to building resilience and supporting yourself. You've got to be on your own side through life and through difficulty. I've talked a little bit about a growth mindset in other talks, and it's based on the work of Carol Dweck, and it's a really useful tool to help us with difficult things and to build resilience. So Carol Dweck's research found that we were either living with a fixed mindset, and in that mindset, we're afraid of making mistakes. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to fail. We're really frightened of failing. So we don't try anything new because we don't want to fail. And difficulty feels really hard, and challenge feels really hard because it means that we are pushed out of our comfort zone, and that feels really frightening and really difficult for us. Whereas a growth mindset sees difficulty and challenges as an opportunity for growth. So we're not afraid of difficulty, we're not afraid of challenge, because we know that we can just try things. And it doesn't matter if we fail, it doesn't matter if things are difficult, it doesn't matter if we look stupid, we're learning. And everything that happens to us in life can be reframed as an opportunity to learn something and to become a different person and to grow in some way. So that idea of a growth mindset as opportunity and not failure enables us to cope much better with adversity and with life's difficulties, and not to be afraid of difficulty. And Carol Dweck's main point that she emphasizes is the way that we use the word yet. So when we say to ourselves, oh, this is all going terribly wrong, and I'm really struggling, I can't do it, yet, is really crucial to maintaining that attitude of we will be able to do it, we will be able to cope with it, maybe not right now, but we will in the future. So anything that we can do to foster and learn a growth mindset is going to help us to face difficulty. And it helps us with this idea of reframing. So looking at difficult things as opportunities. How can I turn this round and make it into an opportunity? How can this help me to grow and help me to learn and help me to develop? What is this teaching me, this situation? What can I learn from this? So all adversity helps us in some way to transform and to change. It's that idea of, diamonds forming under enormous pressure and enormous heat. And at the end of it, we turn into something else other than what we were before, different to what we expected to be, different to what we hoped to be sometimes. But in some ways, we have grown and developed and changed. And sometimes, people feel that the difficulties that they've experienced, they wouldn't change those with hindsight because it's made them the person that they are. And if we can look at whatever is happening and allow the possibility, and I'm not saying that that's always true, and I'm not saying that that's easy in the heat of the moment when we're suffering really extreme difficulty. This is not always the case, but sometimes if we can just stop for a moment and just try on the lens of what might this teach me, what can I learn from this, how can this help me to grow, sometimes that can help us, and it enables us to see opportunity in the situation that we're in, and that helps us foster a longer term resilience by helping us to see things differently. So always try on a reframe, always think differently about the situation that you're in, and just see whether wherever there's challenge, is there an opportunity there for change, for growth, for learning. And also celebrating effort and progress. We tend as a society to be focused on purely on the outcome of success. And if you haven't achieved success, then it's a failure. But actually, every single day that you get through, every single thing that you do, every tiny improvement is a success in itself. So we can say to ourselves, I'm not better yet, I'm not well, but actually I'm a lot better than I was this time last year. Maybe I've got a new food on board. Maybe I'm able to do something now that I wasn't able to do last year or last week. And we can see that as success rather than still thinking, well, I'm still ill and I'm not better yet. Changing our mindset and reframing things can really help us with resilience because it gives us a sense of inner strength. So focusing on what is in your control and taking an action is really powerful to helping us cope with difficult things, even if that action is really small. It doesn't have to be an enormous thing, and we can't solve the problem all at once, and we can't, fix everything. But if you can just focus on the next step that's in front of you and not worry about what might happen in the distant future and what may or may not go wrong, or what you worry about for the future, thinking about the step that's immediately in front of you, what small action can you take right now that can help you? Because when we take a little bit of action, however small, it gives us a sense of power and control, which gives us a sense of empowerment. It's one of those core needs that we feel we have some agency in our lives. So understanding things, learning what you can, educating yourself, becoming more aware, advocating for yourself, taking whatever action you can leads to a sense of empowerment, and it gives us that sense of agency and control, which meets our core needs. So breaking things down into small steps, it may feel completely overwhelming, your treatment plan, or the changes that you may feel you want to make to try and help yourself, or what your doctor has suggested. Break it down into very small actions and focus on just one, and just take that next step. Don't look at the whole staircase, just take the first step. Because when we reduce that overwhelm and we focus on that one step at a time, that helps us to maintain momentum and to keep moving forward. My mum used to panic about driving long distances, and I said to her, well, can you drive forward in a straight line for 10 yards? And she said, well, yes, of course I can. I said, well, then you just keep doing that. Just drive forward for 10 yards, and then drive forward for another 10 yards, and then drive forward for another 10 yards. And after, you do that, you'll have driven 100 miles. And so that really helped her with driving, and it helps me with lots of different things in life. When we feel overwhelmed and we feel afraid of something, break it down into the very smallest step that you feel able to take, and just take that, and then keep repeating that, and keep taking the step, and then the next step. This may feel like a strange one. I often talk about this, but being of service to others is really, really powerful in building resilience in ourselves. Because again, it's one of those core needs that we all have as human beings, to feel that we have a purpose, that our life is contributing to some way, in a way that is greater to just to ourselves. We're able to contribute to society. It helps us with our identity and our self-esteem. We have this need to serve others and to feel of service and of use. We all want to feel useful in some way. And studies show that when we help others in a small way, it has lots of physical health benefits. It reduces our blood pressure and lowers our stress levels, and is even linked to, greater longevity and lower reduced mortality. And it releases oxytocin, which is that lovely connection hormone. So again, it's fueling that need for connection with others, and it's a way that we can meet that need for connection with others. And when we feel compassion for ourselves and for others, when we extend that self-compassion out to feeling compassion for others, that also has lots of mental and physical benefits. And when we do that, when we focus a little bit outwards, it builds resilience, and it takes the focus away from our own difficulty and helps us to meet what's happening in a more resilient and resourced way. And it feels quite challenging for us sometimes when we're poorly to think, gosh, how can I possibly help someone else? But it's surprising. Just, a smile, a phone call, a message on Facebook. It doesn't have to be an enormous thing. It can be something really small, but the more we start to widen our viewpoint and think about other people as well, it helps us to build resilience. We feel more connected, we feel that we're meeting those core needs, and it does a lot of good for us. So even in a tiny, tiny way, think about how you can be of service to others. And define success on your terms. This is the thing that we often struggle with, is that when we live with chronic illness, we can't succeed in the way that, conventional society thinks about success in terms of, money, wealth, possessions, career, all of these things. We define our own success. And once you take back control of your definition of success, you feel more in control and you are able to achieve that success. So success is personal. It's a unique thing to you. So think about what success means for you and set your goals in accordance with that, not with some other wider, societal expectation. If it's difficult to achieve, life is difficult, and it's difficult to achieve what you want to achieve, what you previously hoped for in life, then, we can create a sense of internal distress for ourselves because we're not able to meet this perceived a standard that we want to hold ourselves to. But if we redefine success as being whatever is available to us currently, if getting up and having a shower in the morning is what you can achieve, then that is success for you. And if you can do that and feel that you've been successful, that is good enough. That is success for you. And so once we readjust our definition of success, it enables us to take back a little bit of control, and it gives us a sense of achievement and meets some core needs, which then builds our resilience and builds our feeling that we can achieve things, that we are capable of doing things because we are succeeding at in our own way, at our own goals. So we can ask ourselves, these philosophical questions about, is it possible that somebody can have a completely different life to the one that they imagined and still be happy and still lead a happy life? And of course, the answer to that is yes, for many, many people. And again, Maya Angelou, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And if you're doing that, then you're succeeding. So that's enough. We can redefine our sense of our own purpose and our own success on our own terms. And that helps us to foster resilience rather than feeling that we're failing all the time and that and then we get into a downward spiral. So our amygdala is a part of our brain, part of our quite primitive limbic brain system, and it's a tiny little organelle in the brain about the size of an almond. We have one in each brain hemisphere. And it is our fear center. It's where our anxiety and our difficult emotions come from when we feel stressed and overwhelmed. And when we're not feeling resilient, it's because our amygdala is really activated. And there are lots of things that we can do to regulate the amygdala that have been shown in science and studies that actually affect how dominant and how powerful our amygdala is. And when we can calm our amygdala down, it enables us to be far more resilient and to cope with difficulty much, much better. So these are just a few suggestions here. I'm not going to go into lots of detail about all of these because, you can find information on the internet, and I've done other talks about different aspects of this, but breathing exercises, grounding exercises, hypnosis is a good tool for regulating the amygdala. Mindfulness has been shown to really downregulate and calm the amygdala. Doing meditations and visualizations, all of these things work. The reason they help people is because they're having an effect on that part of the brain and calming the amygdala. Practicing cognitive flexibility, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, reducing our exposure to stress, and also working on any trauma. If you do have any pre-existing trauma in your life, that upregulates the amygdala and makes the amygdala much more likely to switch itself on and help, makes it harder for you to be resilient. So working with a therapist, doing some, different trauma therapies can really help to calm the amygdala down, which then allows you to be more resilient. So there's lots, as I said, lots of information online and lots of other resources about all of these techniques. Finding one of those or a few of those and practicing them regularly is going to help calm your amygdala down and help you to become more resilient. So I mentioned cognitive flexibility there. Flexible thinking. We can teach ourselves to think more flexibly because there is no one way of seeing any situation. There is just the lens that we're looking at it through, and we can change the lens and see the situation differently. And we all have this inbuilt negativity bias in our brains. It's a survival instinct thing. That means our brains are very, very interested in difficult and bad things, and they hardly ever notice good things because obviously it's much more important that we focus on the saber-toothed tiger that's hurtling towards us and not be distracted by the lovely flowers that are down by our feet. So our brains have evolved to be very, very interested and focused on bad things. And so we tend to think a lot about negative things that are happening to us. They tend to preoccupy our thoughts. We tend to see every situation through the lens of, is this dangerous to me? How is this a problem? How is this a threat to me? And over time, that constant looking at things negatively and experiencing the world from that negativity bias, which we all have, it's not a criticism of anybody individually. Every single human being has this way of thinking that our brains are wired to be more negative. But the more we do that, it saps our resilience over time, because we just get more and more and more negativity, and our brains just start to think that the whole world is terrible and everything is awful and it's all hopeless and there's no point in us trying. And our brains, perceive that because they're constantly seeing negativity. But when we become aware of that, we can start to spot it happening and think, oh, actually, this might be my negativity bias. Maybe it's not all bad. Maybe there are some good things to think about. Maybe there are things that aren't quite so difficult. And we can force our brains to look away from the negative things and see the flowers down by our feet and see the good things that are happening in life as well. So we can start to reframe our thoughts and try and aim for a more balanced viewpoint in our minds. So when we notice our brains going, oh, this is terrible, I can't cope with this, we can challenge that a bit and think, oh, is that true? Is there any evidence that I can't cope with this? Well, I've coped with difficult things before, so maybe I can cope with this. And then we reframe it that this is hard, this is really, really difficult, but I have got through difficult things before. I survived this the last time it happened, and I will find ways to cope. So when we start thinking more flexibly like that and start thinking about things in a less negativity biased way, it enables us to activate more optimistic brain pathways, and more problem solving pathways in our brains are able to work better. And we become more resilient because our brains can see that there are some bad things, but also some good things. And that helps to buoy us up rather than sinking down into everything is terrible and life is just awful. And this is one of my favorite examples of this in practice, as a little story that helps to illustrate this, based on Robinson Crusoe. So the poor man is shipwrecked. He's washed up on this desert island in the middle of nowhere. He's lying half dead on the beach, and he thinks to himself, this is terrible. I'm completely alone. I've got no food. I've got no water. I've got no shelter. I can't survive this. This is just hopeless, and I'm going to die here. So he lies there on the beach and he dies. Or exactly the same scenario. Robinson Crusoe washed up on the island, lying half dead on the beach, and he thinks to himself, this is terrible. I'm completely alone. I've got no food. I've got no water. I've got no shelter. Maybe if I drag myself into those trees, I can get myself a little bit of shelter. And once he's got himself into the trees and he shelters, he starts to feel a little bit better. He then notices that there's some fruit on a tree nearby, and he thinks maybe I'll eat some of that fruit. So he eats the fruit, and that gives him a little bit of energy. And then he notices that there's some fallen trees, and he thinks, oh, maybe I could take some of that wood and I could make myself a little hut and get some shelter. And slowly, step by step, he starts taking very small actions, and he survives. He survives long enough to be rescued. And he's using his resources, he's using his skills, he's meeting his core needs, he stays calm, he thinks flexibly, and that enables him to survive for long enough to be rescued. And it's exactly the same scenario, it's exactly the same situation, and we're not pretending that somehow it's magical. Nobody would argue that that's an ideal situation to be in. It's terrible. It is terrible. He's alone. He's got no food and water and shelter in both scenarios. But it's his choices that he makes and the way that he takes small steps that helps him to survive that. And that is cognitive flexibility in action. The only difference is the way that he chooses to think about that situation. So another thing that helps us to be resilient is to reduce our exposure to stress. And that really, sometimes feels impossible because life is really stressful. And sometimes it feels like, things are happening all around us and difficult stuff happens one after another, and we feel as though we don't have, much control over that. And sometimes we don't. Difficult things happen in life. But we do have a little bit of control over how much stress we expose ourselves to. And this is because our brains can't tell the difference between things that we imagine, things that we see on the television, and things that are real, that are really actually a threat to us. And when we're constantly exposed to difficulty that's not real, it drains our resilience and it makes our brain feel under more threat than we really are. And it upregulates that amygdala and switches that on even more. So things like frightening things on the television, the news, frightening films, frightening books, things on social media, negative situations, confrontations, negative people, thinking about what you are exposed to that you do have some control over. Because if you block that out, it reduces that strain, it reduces that incoming stress, and it helps our brains to stay calmer and to become more resilient, because we only have to deal with the real threats and not the millions of other things that we're bombarded with daily in our world. So setting boundaries for ourselves on how long we spend on social media, which social media sites we follow. Some, are much more upregulating than others. Some are very nurturing and calm. So seek out those places on social media where you get support rather than negativity. Limit how much news you're watching. Think about the films that you choose to watch and the music that you choose to listen to, and think about the people that are in your environment and whether or not they're giving off good vibes or whether they're, draining you and giving out negativity. Focusing more on the things that bring you joy and make you feel relaxed, those self-care things, build in those and avoid as much unnecessary noise as possible, because it all takes a toll on our resilience levels, and we become much less resilient if we're constantly watching the news, constantly reading things, about our illness on social media, and on, the internet. It can help us to research, but if we're just constantly reading, bad things and making ourselves feel worried, that is just adding constantly to the stress that our system is under, and it weakens our resilience. So we need to take in the information that we need to know and block out the rest and set really strict boundaries. And it helps to preserve our mental energy and our emotional resilience. And similarly, avoiding toxic positivity. So what do we mean by toxic positivity? So we talked earlier about the idea that it's normal and natural to feel all human emotions, and there are no bad emotions. But sometimes the idea of, some well-being stuff is very focused on positivity, and it minimizes the reality of our situation, and it minimizes our real feelings and encourages us to just pretend that we're positive and that we feel happy all the time, and we're encouraged to just constantly be happy all the time, and that we should be happy all the time, and that we should say, oh yes, I'm fine, everything's fine, pretending that it's okay, pretending that we're happy that we're ill, pretending that it's all okay and there's no problem. It's okay to not be okay. And this is where we go back to that acknowledging our feelings, identifying our feelings, to say to ourselves, this is really hard and I'm in a really difficult situation. That is the reality, and I'm feeling really frightened. It's okay to feel that. We don't have to pretend all the time to be happy and jolly, but there's a middle ground between being positive all the time and being authentic to ourselves, not being overly focused on that negativity bias, but not denying the reality of the situation. We need to monitor our emotions and our mental state and make sure we're not going too far in either direction, because neither is helpful. Pretending to be positive all the time is not honoring our reality and our real emotions, and imagining that the world is completely negative and that everything is always bad, that doesn't help us either, because it saps our resilience. So we need to be starting to become aware of how we're feeling and find the middle ground between that. And, I found this on social media, this image, it is exhausting to be constantly dealing with difficulties. Life keeps throwing you lemons, and it's okay to make lemonade with one. But when you've got hundreds of lemons landing on you constantly, it gets tough. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to say, this is really hard right now. You can't keep positivity constantly up, and we're not designed to do that. We will have moments of feeling positive and moments of feeling down, and we need to acknowledge and honor both of those, all of our emotions. So this idea of inner peace, to finish off with, peace of mind is not the absence of conflict or difficulty. We're not looking here to escape from difficulty, because we can't. Life is difficult, for everybody. Everybody who exists, who lives, will suffer in some way. But inner peace is the ability to be okay in spite of conflict or difficulty. So we can't know, what tomorrow will bring. We can't know, what each day is going to be like, or what we're going to have to deal with. It's just cultivating all of these different tools, using all of these different strategies, enables us to maintain that sense of inner peace despite what's happening around us. And a couple of the phrases that have really helped me personally: this too shall pass. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is going to last forever. There will, it feels today as though it's overwhelming and unbearable, but tomorrow it will be different. Nothing will ever stay the same. And so we can, give ourselves that hope of change in the future, and that can help us in the moment. And all shall be well. Julian of Norwich, a very inspiring lady. Some of her writings have really helped me. And this idea, it was a beautiful song, actually, we used to sing in choir: all shall be well. And that was a mantra that I used to help me get through the most difficult times, because, eventually things change and things pass. So we can expect things to be difficult in the outside world, but acknowledge that they are challenging at the moment, and what we're experiencing with our health is challenging, but it's a moving situation. Our symptoms fluctuate, our condition can go up in severity, but it can also go down in severity. And so there's always the hope for change and for better things to come. And all we can do is cultivate our own inner peace, our own inner well-being, by using all of these different tools, and trusting that by taking one step at a time, all shall be well. So those are my contact details there. If you want to keep in touch, my email is there. I don't know, we are just about on time. So if people want to ask me a couple of questions, maybe we can do a couple of quick questions. But if there isn't time, I'm happy for people to email me with questions. And yeah, that's the end. Thank you very much for listening.